Hello everyone, and welcome to the most name-butchering game dev podcast in the world, Houses for Games. I'm your co-host Ener, and today I'm joined by my host Toto. That's 3 names butchered. And if that was not enough, let me butcher another name without apologizing for it. Mr. Breno! And I'm not even gonna attempt his last name. That's up to him when the episode starts. What a cliffhanger! Now, let's continue this butchering tour and butcher in the door for this week's episode of Games of Houses.
Welcome everyone to the House of Games, and a very good intro by Rune. Thank you so much for that. And today, as usually, we have a special guest with us. So, first of all, to clarify things, Breno, our guest, would you like to introduce yourself and set the record straight how to pronounce your last name, if you will?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So my name is Breno. My last name is pronounced Negreiros. I am a creative director and founder of Lumo Entertainment. I majorly work on different design tasks and also running the studio.
All right, and could you tell us about this studio? How many people are you and where are you based and so on?
We are a remote studio. We were founded in Brazil, but we are 100% remote, so we have people from all around the country, and also some people live abroad. Currently, we have 18 people contributing to the project. We are not like 100% full-time devs in the projects, but there are 18 people working either as a full-time job or part-time or freelance in the different projects that we are developing right now.
Cool, and how long has this studio existed for?
We started like basically 2 years ago, a little bit more than 2 years ago, as an actual game studio. Before, it was a group of developers with some friends. That idea didn't go like forward. We had to pause the studio for a while, and then we formalized everything. And I actually decided to have my own studio, so I kind of reopened the studio for new projects.
When you start working on a game, do you all pitch in with ideas from the get-go, or do you have some sort of hierarchy within the company? We talk a lot about this on House of Games, sort of how companies are made and how you can stay organized and all that stuff. So I'm quite curious. You said that you started with friends and so on. How do you organize all that to make sure that the project is moving forward instead of just you all sort of throwing in a bunch of ideas and you know it doesn't happen, it doesn't move anywhere?
So I think I can answer this question like in two different ways, because our first moment was in 2018. We were a group of 4 friends that started the company. Actually, we started like a development group that was not a company back then. But then we noticed that the projects were not going to work out. We had like different objectives. So back then we kind of decided everything together. There was not someone leading the decisions, and that didn't really work at the end. When I decided to open my own studio, I opened it by myself. The game ideas are mine, but I always try to leave room open for discussions and new ideas from the people that are working with me. For example, in a project that is called A Broken Halo, I had the main idea for the mechanic and the character design, and the character backstory was actually our artist, Mateus, that came up with some ideas, and then we worked out together. So I usually try to have some kind of direction to the team, but I leave a lot of space to creativity inside the different areas of the project.
Could you tell us a little bit about what kind of games have you worked on or are you working on right now?
Sure. So for Lumo, we try always to create games with heart and soul that makes our players think. So our main objective is to have an interesting narrative behind the games, but also with games that challenge the critical thinking of the players. So currently we are working on 2 different games. One is called A Broken Halo. It's a 2D turn-based puzzle game where we play as Zim. She's an angel that had her halo broken, and now she needs to retrieve the broken pieces of her halo so she can recover her powers and memory and leave the dungeon that she's trapped in. The main idea is that every step you take is going to change the dungeon layout. So it's kind of living in a living maze. So you need to find the way out of this maze, planning ahead of your moves. The other game that we're working right now is called Feelings. It's a 3D puzzle game where we play as Sarah, a girl that is struggling with anxiety and depression. She hits a critical point of her life where she noticed that she needs to go on an inner journey to find a way to her connecting with her true feelings. So in this inner journey, she's going to visit floating islands that represent her feelings and memories. And every island she solves, she's going to be one step closer to finding her lost feelings. So we usually try to work on this idea that we always have something to solve, that we have some kind of strategy to create so we can understand how the game works and progress little by little.
I'm curious, is there a reason why one game is 2D and the other one is 3D? And also, how do you balance working on both? How often do you work on the 3D game versus the 2D game and vice versa?
Yeah, the 2D and 3D thing was basically because of the team that we decided to go for each game. So we usually don't have a lot of overlaps in the team. So one person that is working on a Broken Halo is not going to be working on Feelings. So we can let those smaller groups inside the whole team focus 100% on that game. There are some people that work on different projects, but most of the people work on a single one. So when we organize the teams, we have like 2D artists for Broken Halo and 3D artists for Feelings. So that was the reason why we went to the route for Broken Halo. At the same time, we don't separate time for each of the projects. There are different teams all working on different projects.
Interesting. The Feelings game reminds me a lot about the game Rhyme, if you've heard of that.
Yeah, I heard of Rhyme. It was not an inspiration at first, but after we started doing some research for the game, it was actually a title that showed up and we used as a little bit of a reference for us. But yeah, it came up after we started the game. Actually, Feelings, the theme of the game actually was brought by someone by my team. I had the idea of creating a puzzle game, and that was something that I really wanted to do, but I didn't have a theme sorted out already. And then a person that I met on LinkedIn, she had this project for her final thesis for her graduation course. And then she decided to pitch the idea to me, and I liked the theme of the game. And then we kind of put the gameplay mechanic that I wanted with her theme that she was working before, and then we created Feelings from there.
I'm quite curious about this Feelings game. I checked out the trailer and there seemed to be a lot of things you can do in the game. And I saw this underwater city. I assume that you need some sort of equipment to reach it, maybe. In the end, she gets up on a swing and you sort of swing back and forth. I'm quite curious, how many ideas did you end up not implementing in the game? And how did that all happen? Let's say you had a meeting about what functions and what ideas and what she can do and all that stuff. How did that meeting look like? And have you stuck to that, or have the game grown throughout the development where you implement more and more stuff?
So for Feelings, we still have a long journey ahead. There is still a lot of things to do and polish. We are actually reworking the art style and some of the puzzle designs that we had at first. We had a lot of different ideas at the beginning. At the beginning of the pre-production phase of the project, we have a list of different ideas and different features that we want the game to have. In reality, at the beginning, we wanted to do a puzzle platforming game, then only a puzzle game. And then we created a version of the game that was based in 3 different pillars. There were exploration, platforming, and puzzle solving. The platforming was the strongest one of the 3 pillars at the beginning. We took the game for some different events and some business roundtables and everything. And then we noticed that for us and also for the public that was testing the game, the puzzle part was the most intriguing and interesting one. So after like those events, we decided to shift the focus of the game from more like puzzle solving than the other pillars that we had before. And then we started reworking the game from that point. So that was like our first objective with the first playable version of the game. We wanted to see how people understood our ideas and which one were the more interesting one. We already have like a new list of different ideas, and we are doing the same cycle again. Now we're focusing more on the puzzle part of the game. And then we're trying different types of puzzles, different ideas to first test within the team to know, like, is this too hard? Is this interesting or not? To see if it takes too long. And then after we filter internally, we're going to take to different events and see the types of puzzles people like are more interested in and see what works and what doesn't. So it's always a process of having the first objective, having a list of different ideas, implementing those to reach these objectives, and then rethinking if this is the right way to go or if we have to do some like minor changes in the way to achieve our final result.
Have you guys ever published a game?
Yeah, we published a game in 2022. It was called The Alchemist Shop. It was also a 2D game. It is a card game based on solitaire. And the idea is that we are a young alchemist that is going to work on the best alchemist shop for 2 weeks to try to be hired to be a full-time employer for the shop. And then we receive different clients every single day. We have to decide which kind of potion we are going to trade for them. And this potion creation is going to be done by solitaire mechanics. So you have to manage the cards at the table following solitaire rules to create the potions that we are asked for.
I'm checking the trailer now. I love solitaire. This looks quite fun.
We had an episode a couple of weeks back where we talked about level design, and a lot of your game seems to focus a bit on puzzles. So I'm curious, what is your thought process for creating a good puzzle level, and what to think about and how to make it challenging or not too easy and not give too many hints and so on? I know you, Rune, have complained about that in God of War. So what's your thought process on that?
Yeah, so I am actually, I kind of found myself in the game industry studying like level design. At first, I thought I was going to be a programmer, but then I entered the design area and I really fell for the level design part when I was studying in Canada. I think that's why I wanted like to do like a puzzle game, because I think it challenges different things and the level design must be really interesting to make the puzzle game understandable and have a nice flow and the right amount of challenge and guidance that we need to give to the player. So for balancing a puzzle, it's quite a challenging process. I always start with some sketches on my notebook and some random ideas. I like to have a table of the mechanics that I have, and then I try to put those mechanics together and see how I can make them interact and find how to create challenges with those mechanics that I already have. So this is how I usually do how I start the puzzle process. I think that it's really important for the puzzle to be like, we need a clear goal established right at the beginning so the player knows, okay, I need to do this exactly when the puzzle starts. And then we need to guide the player towards this result without giving him the solution like straightforward. So maybe sometimes we actually give them a hint that is going to lead to a wrong direction, but it's going to be like something simple enough that he knows what he needs to start doing. And then after that, he's going to reach an impossible situation where, for example, like a really simple example, there are two pressure plates. So you need to figure out a way to like use the same environment piece to activate two different pressure plates in different moments to solve the puzzle. So you kind of need to give them a test that seems to be impossible But then when they start exploring the mechanics, they're gonna see that it's actually possible to do that. The challenge here is first to think like something that could be thought as impossible and how to make it possible. And also, how are you going to guide and explain things to the player so they know that this is actually possible after a while? We don't want the players to just keep trying, like trial and error until they find out the result. There must be a logic behind the process here. If they try it once, they need to understand why it didn't work, and they need like a feedback for the next step.
I just played Portal 2, so I never played any of the Portal games, but I heard they're really good. I recognize that what you're talking about there, but that's one of the maybe most popular puzzle games, if you would consider that a puzzle game. So it does sound really difficult to get it right, but I do recognize that feeling where you enter a new room and it's like, Jesus Christ, what the fuck am I supposed to do? And then if it does feel impossible, then you slowly make your way through the room anyway. That must be challenging, but it sounds like at least you guys know what you're doing.
And do you have any inspirational games, an example where, even a bad example, or where they did things wrong, or some really good game where they did it right? Just listing on the top of my head, you have Skyrim on the one end, which is just basically make 3 statues the right direction, and that's it, and the solution is almost the same every time. The same with BioShock Infinite had a similar one in the beginning. But then on the other spectrum, you have something that is really, really challenging. So you have The Witness, which is a game that is just, the whole game is just logic puzzles. And to me, maybe I'm not the smartest guy, but to me it sort of ran out of fun after half an hour because I just couldn't figure out 5 puzzles in a row. And it's an open world, so you just wander around and hope you run into an easy one. Do you have a game that hits the sweet spot or does it correctly, or something that you're inspired by?
It kind of depends because there are a lot of games that have puzzles inside, but they're not like puzzle games. So I think the puzzles on this kind of game, they should be a little bit different because it's not the main theme of the game. But if we're talking only like about different puzzle games, I think Portal is one of the best examples of this idea that we have the mechanics to learn. We have some kind of hook that is going to make the players want to play. And we have a lot of revelations along the way that makes the player feel good because they understood how the puzzle works and what they need to do. So I think the progression in Portal is one of the best in a puzzle game. It's one of the best study materials for puzzles because if you take Portal and then it makes the order of the levels, it's going to be a total mess because you're not going to understand what you have to do. But the way that they guide us, explaining one level after the other how things work, make us understand the whole game and the entire progression of the puzzle thinking there. For our project specifically, there's a game called Omino that is a huge reference for us. It's also like a puzzle game that kind of has the same pacing that what we are trying to do with Feelings. So in a general sense, I would say Portal, and for a reference for Feelings, I would say Omino.
I actually quit playing Portal. I'm quite curious I assume you played the second one, have you?
I played both of them.
Okay, so I quit playing Portal due to the slime mechanics that are introduced later in the game. And I played on my Steam Deck, so that could have something to do with that. I always feel like the Half-Life controllers or Portal are a bit slippery. It's kind of like the Uncharted series controllers, but in first-person shooter. So when I played the second half of the game, or whatever it is, when they introduce these slime things where it makes you run faster or bounce, I had to quit playing it because it just became, the controller itself became the challenge, not the puzzles. I'm quite curious if you agree on that, since you are a puzzle king. And also, do you think a similar problem could appear in Feelings? The controller might not be tight enough to make the puzzles enjoyable, and then the controller itself becomes the obstacle to solve the puzzles, like I felt when I played Portal 2.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. When I was playing Portal, I really like to play like third person games. So playing a first person game is a bit hard to me to follow all the controls and everything. There are some moments that were a bit difficult for me to solve the things because of the controls as well. I think it's a huge deal for not only puzzle games, but any kind of game. Getting the controls to work correctly, it's a major thing, and it's a challenging thing as well. So for feelings, for sure, we actually already ran into some of those problems. For example, we have the jump mechanic. In theory, a simple mechanic, but when you land, if you don't stay put after you land, you can fall again. So you need to know exactly how precise the controls need to be like after playtesting the game over and over again. At first, it was like too static for us. Then it became too dynamic. Now we're kind of trying to reach a middle point where it's easy to get, but it's not that stiff. And not only the controls, but also the camera is something important to take in consideration here. Sometimes we want to highlight some parts of the level so the player understands that they need to go there, or they understand that that's an important part of the level. But depending on how the camera is programmed, we cannot do that, or it's harder to do that. So this can lead to frustration, and maybe there is a good puzzle design there, but the controller or the camera that we decided to use are not going to help the player to play the game. So yeah, it's a challenge. It's a really important thing that we should take into consideration every step of the development.
Very cool. You mentioned earlier that you have some developers abroad. So where are everyone located in your team, and how does it work to work in different time zones as well?
Yeah, the time zone thing has been challenging for us. Now we don't have a lot of people living abroad. I myself am living in Lisbon right now, so I'm like 4 hours ahead. There is one person living in Vancouver, and before we had other two people also living in Vancouver, but now they're not in the company anymore. So right now there are only two people. We had another one living in Belgium for a while. So we work in Brazilian time zone, and then myself and the girl that lives in Vancouver, we need to adapt our times to that. Sometimes it's a bit of a struggle because people need to ask me questions and it's already late at night to me. It's kind of lucky that I'm a night owl, so sometimes I work like late at night too, so I can answer those questions. But it's a bit of a challenge sometimes to have like the same schedule. And not only that, like we have some part-time people working with us, so not everyone has the same schedule in the studio. So we need to have those moments that we know that everyone is going to be online, so we can have the meetings and then leave the other moments to other tasks that we don't need to be talking about all the time.
Yeah. Maybe a stupid question, but is your company language Portuguese? Or is it English, or how do you usually communicate within the company?
So the person that is living in Vancouver is actually a Brazilian. So we only speak in Portuguese for now. We don't have anyone that is not Brazilian working with us. We do have like documentation, everything like written in two languages because we're looking for publishers, so we might need them like translated. But for now, we're not focusing on having like international people because it's a bit more like complicated for the contract and everything. But it's something that we're thinking about for the future.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I'm curious about. So, this is something that is sort of a running theme, I would say, how culture affects us and by extension game development. For example, in Japan, you have something that is, to me at least, it's very instruction heavy or text heavy, for example, whereas in the West, it's more, how should I put this, sexy to have as little UI as possible many times. But would you say that there's any difference culturally in how games are made in Brazil, for example, than how they're made in, say, for example, Japan or Sweden or other places where games are produced?
To be honest, I don't see like much of a difference. Depending on the studio, they have like different types of focus. Maybe that they kind of decide if they're going to go with the more Japanese style or the more Western style. I don't really see something that's unique in that perspective from Brazilian studios. What I can see are sometimes themes that they bring from our own culture or some kind of references that we can find in the games that are also related to the culture in general. There's not something that when you look at the game, you say, okay, this is Brazilian because it has this type of UI or it has this type of art style, like something that is already solidified, like in Japan or the RPG anime style that it's kind of already solidified like for a long time. So we don't have that yet.
Maybe there is a cultural style, but since you're in it, you don't see it. That was just thinking out loud. I just thought it was quite interesting with this game Forspoken from Square Enix that came out not too long ago. It was a bit of a fiasco, and I believe they brought on American writers to this Japanese game. And now, after the fact, it was probably not a good idea. It should have stayed 100% Japanese, is what some people say. Not sure where I was going with that, though, but it is interesting with cultures in games.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is an interesting point. So, as you say, that it's harder to notice what kind of culture you have until you meet something that contradicts it. So, for you then, Breno, what would you say is something that you think is very different about other games? Say, for example, from Japan or something. And that maybe will tell a bit about, for example, text heavy games is to me very Japanese because that's not something that's very common here. And that maybe tells a little bit about the culture I'm from, that you usually want to have as little text as possible, maybe. Do you have any thoughts on that, or?
If we think about, for example, the narratives in general, they have a different, I wouldn't say structure, but they have a different type of narrative in Japan and in the other parts of the world. When we think about games like Nier Automata, it's clearly like a Japanese game. Like there's a Japanese mind behind the game. I really like narrative in games, and this is one of my inspirations in general. I think the narrative style is really different depending on the part of the world that we're creating the game. Maybe that's something that we can see on Brazilian games, but what I noticed that some games they do that. It's hard to see some of the aspects if you are not part of the culture because you don't will not get the references. But I think everyone is going to have a different way of telling stories, and I think they have like different structures after all in different countries.
Yeah. And looking forward, what kind of games would you like to create in the future? Say, if all of your dreams come true and you can build a really big studio, or you could make your fantasy dream game, what would you make, or what would you like to create?
What I really like to do with projects in Lumo is that I want to explore like different areas. So I really wanted to create card games, puzzle games, games that are based on narrative, games that have dice roll as an important mechanic. So our main idea is to mix those different genres, also turn-based games, and then create different games mixing those ideas, you know? So I would say that there's not like a specific genre or type of game that I have as a dream to do at Lumo. I have those different ideas that I want to experiment and to see where I can go with them to make different styles and different ideas and get those results. I also have some side projects. I could say that I really want to create like an RPG game, probably not 100% open world, but I really want to have this big project in the future. Yeah, that's what I can say. Like, I really want to work on an RPG in the future, but for Lumo specifically, I really want to have those different genres like working together and experimenting and finding a way of making them, mixing those ideas.
I always respect the studios that try different things and not just stick to one thing, so kudos. That's cool you guys do that and have the balls to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, every time you start a new project and it's something different, you are, in worst case scenario, you are eliminating the fan base you had from the first game because they might not be into the next thing and so on. But that's cool that you guys do that. I think that's awesome. And it must be fun to work there as well if you're always trying new things.
Yeah, absolutely. And something else that I noticed on your website, I think it was, you also have a podcast related to the company, if I'm not mistaken. Could you tell us more about what that is?
We participated in 2 different podcasts last year after we presented our games at an event in Brazil called Brazil Game Show. So we were invited to talk about feelings and about the development of the game in general. Yeah, that happened like twice in the end of last year.
What kind of games do they feature on the Brazil Game Show?
Our games are games in general there.
Both, I guess.
In general, there are like a lot of different genres there. So there was some kind of hack and slash arena game. There was like some party games there too, like some platforming games, some roguelikes. I don't really remember all the names of the games that were there. A lot of companies there showcasing the games. But for Lumo, we brought the first version of Feelings in a Broken Halo. And also we showcased the Alchemist Shop. So we have all of our 3 games there. So people could play test. We kind of have one computer always running Feelings and the other one on the sides that the people could choose one of the 3 games to play. We have this idea that we want to have the different genres, and the idea is like in a couple of months start doing like small prototypes to have different games and see if they have potential or not to be like a bigger game. So we wanted to experiment that idea at the event and have different games showcasing there. So people already know that we are a company that has an idea to have different games running at the same time.
You mentioned before when we talked about cultures and art design. Do you guys make your own assets, or how many people are working on those, if that's the case?
Yeah, basically all assets that we use are made by our artists. It depends on the game. Talking about feelings, we have 2 concept artists working on the project. Then we have 4 people actually working on 3D models, being 1 for character and 3 for environment and shaders. And we have 1 person doing the textures for the game too. So we have a lot of different people working on different parts of the game. When we talk about like a Broken Halo, we have a single artist that is doing all the art, like from UI to the animations, who's doing everything. So it would depend on the project.
Brazil is known to have extremely expensive games when you buy them in mom and pop shops and consoles and all that stuff. How does that translate to actually developing games, like the computers and all that stuff? Is that filthy expensive as well, or is it reasonable?
Yeah, it is. It's expensive to get like a real good equipment to develop games. This is actually something that we are struggling with because right now we still like looking for investment in publishers so we can like grow as a company. And some people in our team, they don't really have the best equipment yet. So we need to level up a little bit so we have everyone with a good equipment to run the game and everything. It's actually a good thing too because there are some people with computers that are not that strong that when they try feelings, specific bugs appear for them because of the hardware. So we are able to find some problems with the game because of the computers, but it's not the ideal thing. We need to have everyone working with machines almost at the same level. So it is a struggle that we have.
So what tech stack are you on? Are you using Unity or some other game engine?
For now, we're using Unity. We plan on trying some games on Unreal in the future, but for now, we just use Unity.
Yeah, very cool. And what is the gaming scene in Brazil like? Are there any known names, so to speak, from there, or is it a very young industry in Brazil, or what's your take on that?
If you compare to other Brazilian studios, we have some big studios already there. We have Aquaris, we have Mad Mimic, that is also a really nice studio. I don't know if you know the game called Dandy Ace.
No, I haven't heard of it.
It's kind of a roguelike. It's like a bit like Hades. It's a really interesting game. I don't think we have like a really big studios compared to the ones outside, but we already have some really established companies and they already make some really nice game. So I would say in the past years, there's a huge progression in the gaming scene. Also, there's a couple that worked on big games like outsourcing and trading parts of the different games like Horizon Zero Dawn and the other Horizon 2. So yeah, I think there are some companies that are kind of big in the national scenario, but I see that it's growing a lot in the past like 10 years or so.
Going back to the prices of games and all that stuff, do you know why that is? I mean, it's taxes, I suppose, but does that also affect making games in Brazil? Is the gaming industry heavily taxed, or is it like any other industry?
It's heavily taxed when we want to buy games and consoles. For developing the game, it's not actually like a huge deal. To release the game for Steam, it's going to be easy to do if you have a computer that you have the basic things on it. The thing that is a bit difficult is to do the porting to consoles because we need the dev kits. Sometimes getting the dev kits are a bit difficult. I'm not talking about the experience because I didn't go through this process yet. I talked to other developers already, and a lot of the meetings that I attended, people were talking about the same issue over and over again. So I know it's a struggle that I'm going to face in the near future. For developing a game itself, it's not a huge problem because Steam is pretty accessible for everyone.
Yeah. Is there any difference, for example, in the culture of how you see games? So I know that, for example, in Australia, it seems really restrictive with having either sexuality or violence in games. But what is it like in Brazil? Is a lot of games censored a lot, or is it just fair game for everyone?
No, there's not like a lot of censorship rules there, so we kind of have access to any kind of game and people enjoy like there are different groups like that enjoy different things too, but I don't see like that restriction here.
Cool. At least that must be a relief to not have to worry about that, I suppose.
Yeah, it's much better having this kind of freedom. Of course, there are some limits that you cannot go over, right? But this is for everyone. And being inside those boundaries, we can pretty much have anything.
Speaking of freedom, I'm currently working on a game, and as I'm writing the story, I'm using a lot of cruel words, and I imagining it sort of like an 18 plus type of game, but it's not supposed to be that way. But when I develop games, I don't want to think about restrictions or the rules, when you're gonna have a game go through the ESRB and all that stuff. There are rules, and you can't do whatever you want in a game. When I develop games, I tend to ignore that, and when the game is done, I can sort of discuss with myself, like, well, am I okay with removing this, or can I release on Steam like the proper version of the game? And then for console, I will take stuff out just so it passes all those restrictions from Nintendo and PlayStation and Microsoft, for example. So my question is, when you make games, do you keep this in mind, or do you think about this throughout the game? Now, Feelings is a game about this girl who is, I believe you said, depressed or something along those lines. I can imagine that you're not allowed to have medicines in the game because all of a sudden it needs an 18 plus rating or something like that. So when you make games, do you keep thinking about these rules, or do you just let your creative freedom take over, and then in the end of the process, in the end of the project, you go back and look at what you can move and not, and so on?
So I don't think we're like kind of looking the rules all the time. What I know that we've done a lot in Feelings is that how can we talk about a serious subject like mental health without being like too aggressive or too overwhelming for the player? So we always have the player in mind, not exactly the rules. We wanted Feelings to have this kind of theme, but to transmit the idea using colors, some like environmental assets, some parts of the dialogues, the narrative. We wanted to make a lot of visual cues that are going to give that idea that we want to the experience to be feelings, not like using strong things all the time. So for now, I think all the ideas that we had were like inside the rules, let's say. So it didn't happen to us so far. The only thing was really like, okay, we want the game to be like a pleasant experience. We don't want to overwhelm the players, especially at the beginning, to throw a lot of heavy things at the player. So the first part of Feelings is kind of a light tone, and people are going to discover the problems that Sarah is dealing with little by little. And if the person's playing just for the puzzles, the theme is going to be there, the ambience is going to be there, but there's like different layers of the game that you can explore to go deeper in the theme, or not if you're just there for the puzzles and the overall experience and without going that deep into the narrative. I think that's my issue. We think about the player in this experience that we want without being like, in this case, specifically overwhelming the player with a difficult subject.
When do you plan on releasing the game?
So this is actually a hard question right now. We are searching for a publisher for the game, so it's going to depend when we sign the deal with them. But in theory, it should be around like Q3, Q4, 2024. It's going to depend when we sign the deal. So the best case scenario would be Q3 2024, but it could be a bit later depending on the negotiations and everything.
How far along are you on this project in terms of percentage? What percentage would you slap on it at this very moment?
So I would say that we are between 20 and 30% of the game. I'm trying to consider the things that we have planned, the things that we have implemented already. We are kind of shifting the focus, so we're changing a lot of the level layouts that we had before. So we're pretty much starting to have something that's really going to look like the final game. So I would say close to 30% of development has been finished. And then we're moving to the other part that in the next month, we're going to have a version of the game that really looks like the final project. And then we're going to just polish and fine tune everything that we have.
Cool.
And how long would you estimate that the game is from start to finish when it's finished? How long will it take to play through it all?
If you're going to consider like an average playthrough that the person is not going to be like a completionist on it or anything, I would say between like 3 and 4 hours would be the time for completing the game. If the player is going to like look for every type of thing that we put, like do every side mission and talk to all NPCs, explore everything, they would probably go between 6 and 8 hours, but I believe the average would be between 3 and 4.
Interesting.
I think we're starting to approach 1 hour, but before we end the episode, do you want to promote something, or how can our listeners support you and get more updates about your progress or buy your games or anything like that?
Yes, so people can support us in Patreon. We have already like our Patreon page working here. So we're starting to do some crowdfunding campaigns. So next month, we'll probably start releasing some things about those ideas. All of our games right now are on Steam, so people can already buy The Alchemist Shop or wishlist A Broken Halo and Feelings. I think this is where people can find us, and also like follow us on Instagram. We usually post things about the development of the games and the news of the company there. And also there's a link tree for all of our related websites and participation in different events.
Crowdfunding is sort of an interesting venue that I don't think that many game studios approach. So what can people expect for subscribing to your Patreon? Do you have sort of a special tier of updates and news, or how does that whole thing work?
Yes, we have different kind of rewards that we're gonna do with Patreon. So things like receiving different types of updates, having access to the most recent builds, like testing different versions of the games per month. They could also vote for content that they want us to share. We have some art books that we're also developing to share with the people that are with us on Patreon. So we are still polishing the Patreon page, but this is the most of the rewards that we believe that we could offer. Also, we have a Discord page, and people are going to have access to a specific area of our Discord if they join Patreon.
Perfect, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. And Rune, do you have any other questions before we end the episode?
Are you guys on Twitter? I can't find you.
No, right now we only have an Instagram page.
Okay. Well, that was my final question.
Yeah, we can make sure to link that as well. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you to everyone for listening. Thank you to Rune for being my co-host as always, and We will see you next week. Bye!
Bye!